Hello and welcome to the Libertarian Perspective, a discussion of state, local, and national issues with a libertarian flair. My name is Doug Klippel. I'm the former two-time state chairman of the Libertarian Party of Florida, and we appreciate you tuning in to our broadcast today. With me today, the regional representative from the Libertarian Party of Florida for this area, Phillip Laibe. Phil, good to have you back in the hot seat again.
Good to be here, Doug.
Yeah. And our friends in Jacksonville City Hall, in Tallahassee, and certainly in Washington, D.C. have been up to a lot of mischief since we've been in these seats, Phil. We've got a lot to talk about.
They certainly have been. I'm kind of scared. I don't want to be right, but I am.
Well, Phil, we've got an overhead that we're going to put up today. Our broadcast is going to focus on health care and taxes. Now, you know, the old saying is there's not only things certain in life were death and taxes. Hopefully we're not going to have to say health care, death, and taxes, and hopefully we're not going to say health care and death in the same sentence very much, but we are going to get into an overview of this legislation that was signed by President Obama, I guess about a month ago now, Phil. We're going to talk about some of our concerns around this health care bill, and that's going to take up actually the majority of our broadcast. Because tax time is in the air, we're filming this right before the day that lives in infamy every year, that being April 15th. We're also going to talk a little bit about the income tax here in America and some facts on the income tax, and talk about is everybody paying their fair share and maybe some alternatives to our current income tax system. So, and finally, of course, how you as viewers out there can get involved and fight for what we think is the right side of these causes. So without any further ado, Phil, we're going to just kind of roll through and do some highlights of this health care legislation. We have another overhead that we're going to put up around what we can expect to see in 2010. And we're going to go through these pretty quickly, and then I'm going to get your reaction. So, you know, in 2010, this year, we got some tax subsidies for small businesses to provide coverage to employees. Insurance companies no longer able to bar coverage to children with pre-existing conditions. And we're going to talk about that pre-existing conditions clause because that's going to come up as we talk about the highlights in some later years. And children can stay on their parents' policies until 26 years of age. So literally for a third of somebody's life now, somebody can actually stay attached to their parents' insurance policies.
How are you going to get them out of the basement with stuff like this?
And you're not even a parent and you've got those kind of concerns. That's absolutely right. Continuing on with what we can expect in 2011 and 2013 with this health care legislation. Long-term care system set up so people can pay into it and receive support payments later in life for quote-unquote daily living. Drug makers start to face an annual fee of $2.5 billion, which continues to increase every year from that point. A new Medicare tax for those making above $250,000 a year. Payroll tax increase from 1.45% to 2.35%.
I thought we weren't supposed to tax the poor under this.
A new 3.8% tax on unearned income, which is, you know, dividends and interest income and things along those lines. And a new excise tax of 2.3% on all medical devices. So now we start to see that, you know, these taxes really start to kick in. Let's go ahead and go to 2014. Exchanges for insurance policies. Insurance companies cannot deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. And again, that's one of those things I think a lot of people say, yeah, that's a great idea, but I'm going to have a discussion after we get through these slides, and we're going to talk about whether that's a good idea or not. Now we start to get into the heavy hand of the government. Required health insurance or a fine is levied for employers with 50 or more employees. Actually, that required health insurance, that's for the individual. That's if somebody doesn't have their own insurance, the government apparently aided by IRS agents, is going to levy a fine. Expands Medicare to those 133% below the poverty level. So, in other words, if you're 33% above what the poverty level is, you're also going to get expanded Medicare. And of course, where the poverty line is drawn is a tremendously political distinction. Insurance industry now start to have to pay additional fees of $8 billion, which is going to increase in subsequent years. And then finally, probably the biggest joke of this whole thing, there's going to be a Medicare board implemented to recommend strategies for cost reduction. Well, we certainly know how successful they've been in reducing costs for that program, since it is in essence bankrupt already. And then finally, Phil, our last slide, last slide before we get some of your reaction to this. In 2016, 2018, penalty for those without insurance increases up to $685 a year, or 2.5% of their taxable income, whichever is greater. An excise tax of 40% imposed on Cadillac plans. These are plans that a lot of people that work for organizations right now already have that have a certain dollar value, there's going to be an excise tax imposed on those. And businesses with more than 100 employees can buy insurance on exchanges if allowed for their state. And so, actually, let me put up this one more slide, Phil, and then we'll get your reaction. Just in terms of some of the broad issues for libertarians, and I would say libertarians / conservatives / anybody who's paying attention should have some of these kind of concerns. The first one is cost, expected to add $562 billion to federal deficits. And we are really at a point right now, $108 trillion in unfunded liabilities, if you think about Social Security, Medicare, and now this health care bill. And then, of course, the little question, is it constitutional to require the purchase of insurance or anything, and is health care a right? Obviously, we have to be concerned about the political process itself, and then finally, the legacy of this legislation. So, Phil, that's a big data dump for both the audience and for you. Your reaction to all that, and what's your take on the current situation?
I'm really concerned because I just don't think, I have friends that are more on the left, and since they're in power, some of them like this, which I think that if this same legislation was put in place by Republicans, and this type of thing could be, Republicans aren't all this small government, they would call it what it is, which is a healthcare insurance bailout, and then they would actually be questioning the fact that where do people get off legislating choices? What if I'm a person that doesn't like our current healthcare system? Maybe I want acupuncture or to drink green tea or something. I'm being forced to buy into this. What if I'm Amish or, I have religious beliefs that are against it? I'm being forced to go into this, and it's basically coercive. And when I talk to people about this on the left, I was really shocked at some of the attitudes. A person told me to my face, if you're opposed to this, you're stupid, you don't know what's in your best interest, and you should be forced to make this choice.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times people think of authoritarian policies and stuff as being the domain of the right, but as libertarians, we know that when you get to either extreme of that political spectrum, either the right or the left, you do get very draconian, very dogmatic approaches from both perspectives. Now, granted, the right may be forcing you to go to church or keeping you from reading or viewing certain materials or something along those lines, or keeping you from having a drink on a Sunday, perhaps. But when we get to the left and we get to things like healthcare or something along those lines, the attitudes, the arteries are just as hardened, and the dogmatism is as strong. Right, and that's a slippery slope. If it's okay to say, we make the right choice for you, you're too stupid. If healthcare in general opens up this whole thing, I'm kind of overweight. It's because I like candy, I like fast food, sometimes I drink beer. When you get into this whole thing where you're allowed to control people, it can turn into the healthcare bill will be updated to that you're not allowed to eat certain foods because they're considered unhealthy by the government. And some people say, well, that sounds crazy, that sounds science fiction-y, but when you get into the realm of where the government is allowed to make your choices, it's not. Well, when you are forced into some kind of a collective and you're forced to pay for everybody else's health care, then your weight and my weight and your diet and my diet does become everybody's concern because they have a vested economic interest in it, if you will. Obviously, as libertarians, we're opposed to that kind of a mindset and that kind of a philosophy. Phil, what is your reaction to the fact that, some commentators, I think quite rightly, have pointed out, if the federal government can actually mandate that each citizen purchase something from a third party that they may not want, may not feel that they need, if they can actually do that, is there actually any limit to what they can't